The cold, biting wind of the Danubian frontier howled against the canvas of the imperial tent. But inside, the only sound was the scratching of a reed pen against papyrus. Marcus Aurelius, the Emperor of Rome, the most powerful man on earth, sat alone in the dead of night, illuminated by the flickering amber glow of a solitary oil lamp. Outside his quarters, an army of tens of thousands awaited his command, and across the empire, millions looked to his word as absolute law. He possessed the authority to move legions, to execute rivals, to alter the maps of kingdoms, and to command the fates of countless souls with a single nod of his head. Yet, as he looked at his reflection in the polished surface of his bronze basin, he did not see a conqueror of nations. He saw a man who was engaged in a far more demanding, far more perilous war. The war against his own internal weaknesses, his own doubts, his own anger, and his own fatigue. He dipped his pen in ink and wrote down a thought that was meant for no eyes but his own, a reminder to heal his spirit in the midst of chaos, whispering to himself that he must look within, for within is the fountain of good, and it will ever bubble up if thou wilt ever dig. This midnight scene captures the essence of a truth that our modern world has largely forgotten. We live in an era obsessed with external control, a time when we are constantly encouraged to manage, influence, shape, and dominate the world around us. We strive to manipulate our public images, to climb social hierarchies, to dictate how our colleagues perceive us, and to force our loved ones to conform to our expectations. We consume countless books, podcasts, and seminars dedicated to the art of managing people, mastering negotiations, and influencing the crowd. We believe deep down that if we can just gain enough authority, secure enough wealth, or exert enough pressure on the people around us, we will finally achieve peace, security, and happiness. We look outward, projecting our anxieties onto a world that refuses to cooperate, screaming at the storms of life and wondering why the wind will not obey our commands. But Marcus Aurelius, sitting in the mud and blood of the Marcomannic Wars, understood a profound paradox that remains as vital today as it was nearly 2 millennia ago. He realized that the pursuit of external control is a trap, a beautiful, seductive illusion that leads inevitably to frustration, anxiety, and a fractured soul. He saw that the more a person tries to govern the behavior of others without first governing their own mind, the weaker and more fragile they become. True power does not flow from the throne of an empire or the corner office of a corporation, nor does it come from the number of followers we accumulate or the degree to which we can bend others to our will. True power begins and ends within the boundaries of our own character. It is the quiet, unwavering mastery over our own thoughts, our own emotions, our own reactions, and our own desires. To attempt to rule the world before ruling yourself is like building a massive stone fortress on a foundation of shifting sand. The higher you build, the more spectacular and devastating the eventual collapse will be. Consider the landscape of our daily lives fractured by constant noise and the relentless pressure to perform. We wake up and immediately reach for our phones, plunging our minds into a turbulent sea of opinions, criticisms, trends, and spectacles. We see a comment that triggers our anger, a headline that fuels our anxiety, or a display of someone else's apparent perfection that ignites the slow-burning fire of envy. In an instant, our internal peace is shattered, not by an invading army, but by a few pixels on a screen. Our immediate impulse is to strike back, to leave a scathing reply, to correct the stranger, or to desperately alter our own life to match the standard we just witnessed. We try to control the narrative, to force the digital world to validate our existence and agree with our perspective. In doing so, we hand over the keys to our mental citadel to completely anonymous forces. We become puppets, dancing to the strings of every passing event, every casual insult, and every unpredictable turn of fortune. We think we are engaging with the world, but in reality, we are being mastered by it. Marcus Aurelius faced a version of this digital noise, though his arena was composed of flesh, blood, whispers, and court intrigues.
Every morning, before the sun rose over the hills of Rome or the forests of Pannonia, he would prepare his mind for the human onslaught that awaited him. He would remind himself that the people he was about to encounter would be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and unsociable. He did not say this from cynicism or bitterness, but as an act of profound psychological preparation. He understood that expecting the world to be filled only with kind, rational, and cooperative people is a form of madness. People will act according to their nature, their ignorance, and their unexamined wounds. If we allow their behavior to dictate our internal state, we have voluntarily enslaved ourselves to them. If a leader loses his temper because a subordinate is incompetent, or if a parent screams because a child is rebellious, who is truly in control? The one who provoked the reaction has become the master, and the one who reacted has become the subject.
The tragedy of the human condition is that we spend our brief, precious lives trying to fix the mirror instead of cleaning our own face. We believe that if our spouse would just change their habits, if our boss would finally recognize our worth, if our politicians would act with absolute wisdom, or if our financial markets would remain stable, then we would be at peace. We treat our minds as passive vessels that can only contain joy if the external conditions are absolutely perfect. But the external world is inherently chaotic, governed by a web of cause and effect that is far too vast and complex for any single human being to dictate. When we tie our well-being to the behavior of others or the outcome of events, we are choosing to live in a state of permanent vulnerability. We become like a ship without a rudder, tossed violently by every wave of circumstance, rejoicing when the sea is calm and panicking at the first sign of a cloud. Stoicism invites us to step off this exhausting treadmill and to make a fundamental distinction that can alter the entire course of our lives. The distinction between what is up to us and what is not up to us. This is the cornerstone of the philosophy that sustained Marcus Aurelius through plague, betrayal, war, and personal grief. What is up to us? Our opinions, our impulses, our desires, our aversions. In short, whatever is our own doing. What is not up to us? Our bodies, our possessions, our reputations, our public offices. In short, whatever is not our own doing. When you truly absorb this map of reality, you begin to see that almost all human suffering arises from a simple, tragic mistake. We invest our identities, our efforts, and our emotions into the things we cannot control, while completely neglecting the one thing we actually can govern, our own choices. Imagine the freedom that comes from fully embracing this truth in the middle of a modern workplace conflict. You have labored for months on a project, pouring your intellect, your late nights, and your passion into every detail. When the day of the presentation arrives, a colleague undermines your work, a manager offers cold, unconstructive criticism, and the credit you deserved is given to someone else. The natural human reaction is a toxic cocktail of resentment, self-pity, and rage. You want to confront the colleague, argue with the manager, or retreat into a dark space of bitter compliance. You feel defeated because you couldn't control their reactions or secure their praise. But the Stoic perspective offers a radical, life-saving alternative. It reminds you that the quality of your work, the integrity of your effort, and the dignity with which you conducted yourself were entirely up to you, and you fulfilled that duty. The appreciation of your manager, the honesty of your colleague, and the final outcome of the meeting were never yours to command. Why then do you allow your internal worth to be measured by a currency you do not own? Marcus Aurelius practiced this relentless redirection of focus every single day. He was an emperor who did not want to be an emperor. He was a philosopher at heart, a quiet student of books and ideas, thrust by inheritance into the demanding role of managing a crumbling empire. He faced a devastating pandemic known as the Antonine Plague, which decimated his population and emptied his treasuries. He faced the rebellion of his most trusted general and closest friend, Avidius Cassius, who attempted to seize the throne.
He suffered the loss of his beloved wife, Faustina, and watched 8 of his children die before reaching adulthood. If any man had an excuse to succumb to despair, to curse the heavens, or to lash out at the world with tyrannical rage, it was Marcus. He possessed the absolute power to punish those who failed him, to execute those who doubted him, and to drown his sorrows in unparalleled luxury. Yet his private writings contain no self-pity, no vengeance, and no demands for a softer fate. When news reached him that Avidius Cassius had betrayed him and claimed the title of emperor, Marcus did not call for a bloody purge. He did not let hatred poison his mind. Instead, he gathered his soldiers and delivered a speech that shocked the ancient world. He stated that his greatest fear was not the war itself, but that the conflict would prevent him from showing mercy. He expressed a desire to forgive the man who had betrayed him, to remain a friend to the one who had become his enemy, and to prove to the world that it was still possible to meet treachery with goodness. This is not the behavior of a man trying to dominate others. It is the behavior of a man who had completely conquered his own ego.
This historical lesson speaks directly to our modern struggles with criticism and betrayal. In our interconnected world, we are more exposed to the judgments of others than ever before. A critical review, a harsh comment, a broken promise from a friend, or a sudden betrayal by a business partner can feel like an existential assault. Our immediate instinct is to defend our reputation, to launch a counteroffensive, or to obsessively analyze why they treated us so unfairly. We spend sleepless nights constructing imaginary arguments in our heads, proving our innocence and their guilt. But Marcus would remind us that the toxic behavior of another person is their problem, not ours. He wrote that the best revenge is to not be like your enemy. If someone treats you with dishonesty, your victory lies in maintaining absolute honesty. If someone treats you with malice, your victory lies in preserving your kindness. To respond to cruelty with cruelty or to pettiness with pettiness is to allow the flawed character of another person to degrade your own soul. It is an admission that their vice has the power to destroy your virtue. We often mistake aggression for strength and meekness for weakness. We tend to view the loud, demanding, and controlling individual as a figure of authority. We look at the executive who screams at his staff, the influencer who aggressively defends their status, or the individual who dominates every conversation as examples of power. But Stoicism pulls back this curtain to reveal a desperate, trembling insecurity. The need to control others is always a symptom of an internal vacuum. The person who must dominate their environment is a person who cannot tolerate their own internal emptiness. They are terrified of uncertainty, terrified of vulnerability, and above all, terrified of losing the external props that support their fragile sense of self. They are like a tyrant who builds massive walls around his palace because he knows that the slightest breeze of truth could overthrow his rule. In contrast, the person who has attained self-mastery possesses an unquiet, unshakable stability that requires no external validation. They do not need to raise their voice, they do not need to demand respect, and they do not need to orchestrate the actions of others to feel secure. They are anchored within. When Marcus Aurelius stepped onto the battlefield or into the Roman Senate, his presence was powerful precisely because he was not seeking anything from the people around him. He did not need their applause to feel successful, and he did not fear their disapproval. He viewed the praise of the crowd as nothing more than the clacking of tongues, as meaningless as the chirping of birds in the trees. Because he wanted nothing from them, he could not be manipulated by them. He was truly free. This internal freedom is the ultimate goal of the Stoic path, and it requires us to look honestly at our own habits, our own desires, and our own dependencies. We live in a culture that is designed to cultivate addiction. Addiction to comfort, addiction to distraction, addiction to status, and addiction to ease. We are constantly conditioned to avoid discomfort at all costs. If we feel a flicker of boredom, we reach for entertainment.
If we feel a twinge of anxiety, we seek immediate validation or numbness. If we face a difficult task, we procrastinate in favor of short-term pleasure. In doing so, we slowly erode our own capacity for self-discipline. We become slaves to our impulses, driven by our appetites rather than guided by our reason. We like to think of ourselves as independent agents, but if we cannot control our hand from reaching for our phone, or our mouth from consuming what harms us, or our mind from dwelling on bitter thoughts, we are not free. We are under the tyranny of our own lower nature. Self-mastery requires us to initiate a gentle but firm rebellion against these internal tyrants. It requires us to practice what the ancient philosophers called voluntary discomfort. This does not mean torturing oneself or living a life devoid of joy, but rather deliberately exposing ourselves to small hardships to remind our minds that we can endure them. It means choosing the difficult conversation over comfortable silence. It means stepping into the cold shower to wake up the spirit. It means fasting from digital distractions to reclaim our attention. It means choosing to work on our long-term goals when every nerve in our body is crying out for rest. When you consciously choose discomfort, you break the chains of dependency. You prove to yourself that your mind is stronger than your comfort, that your purpose is greater than your cravings, and that you can stand upright even when the environment is hostile.
Let us look closely at how this principle applies to our relationships, which are often the primary source of our desire for control. How much of our relational anxiety comes from trying to change the people we love? We look at our partners, our children, or our friends, and we see their flaws with crystalline clarity. We believe that if they would just listen to our advice, organize their lives better, or adopt our worldview, they would be happier and our relationship would be seamless. We offer unsolicited critiques, we drop passive-aggressive hints, and we feel a deep sense of frustration when they ignore our wisdom and repeat their old mistakes. We view their stubbornness as a personal failure or an insult to our affection. But true emotional intelligence, as illuminated by Stoicism, begins with the realization that every human being is a sovereign entity, responsible for their own path and their own awakening. You can love someone deeply, you can support them fully, you can provide them with resources, and you can offer them a model of virtue, but you can never, under any circumstances, make their choices for them. To try to do so is an act of subtle arrogance. It assumes that you know better than they do what their journey requires. Marcus Aurelius spent years trying to guide his son Commodus, hoping to instill in him the virtues of a philosopher king. He provided him with the finest tutors, exposed him to the greatest minds, and modeled justice and restraint every day of his life. Yet history records that Commodus grew up to be one of the most brutal, eccentric, and unhinged tyrants in the history of Rome. Marcus, despite his absolute power as an emperor and his profound wisdom as a philosopher, could not control the character of his own child. If Marcus Aurelius could not force his own child to be virtuous, what makes us think we can force our spouses, our parents, or our friends to change their nature? The realization of this limitation is not a cause for despair, but for a profound, compassionate release. When you accept that you cannot control the character of others, you stop judging them, you stop resentfully tracking their missteps, and you stop trying to fix them. Instead, you focus on what is actually in your power, how you treat them. You choose to meet their ignorance with patience, their anger with calmness, and their flaws with unconditional love. You understand that they, like everyone else, are doing the best they can with the level of awareness they currently possess. Your influence over them ceases to be a product of pressure and manipulation. Instead, it becomes a natural consequence of your own inspiring example. A person is rarely changed by a lecture, but they are frequently transformed by witnessing a life lived with absolute integrity, serenity, and grace. This shift from external manipulation to internal transformation is particularly critical when navigating the modern arena of professional ambition and entrepreneurship.
We are told from an early age that success is about conquering the market, defeating the competition, and scaling the mountain of material wealth. We project our desires into the future, visualizing the day we achieve our goals, believing that our arrivals will cure our current anxieties. We tie our peace of mind to a specific revenue target, a particular job title, or the acquisition of a specific asset. In doing so, we enter into a state of chronic stress. We view every delay as a crisis, every market fluctuation as a catastrophe, and every uncooperative client as an enemy of our progress. We become consumed by fear, fear of failure, fear of loss, fear of insignificance. Marcus Aurelius would look at our modern boardrooms, our startups, and our financial metrics with a gentle, sorrowful smile. He would remind us of the vast nature of all material things. He often wrote about the vast river of time, a roaring torrent into which all things are plunged and instantly swept away. He looked back at the great figures of the past, Augustus, Hadrian, Antoninus, and noted that their courts, their wars, their grand ambitions, and their immense wealth had vanished into smoke and ash. The same fate awaits our quarterly reports, our corporate empires, our bank accounts, and our monuments of ambition. This realization is not meant to make us lazy or nihilistic. Rather, it is meant to clarify our priorities. It frees us from the paralyzing fear of failure.
When you realize that the ultimate outcome of your business, career, or creative project is subject to 1,000 variables beyond your control, you stop obsessing over the finish line. You ground your awareness in the present moment, focusing entirely on the quality of your current action. You ask yourself, am I acting with justice? Am I practicing honesty? Am I serving others with my talents? Am I bringing discipline and excellence to this specific task? This philosophy transforms your work from a desperate struggle for survival into a beautiful expression of human excellence. If the business succeeds, you accept the fortune with humility and gratitude, knowing it was partly a gift of circumstance. If the business fails, you accept the outcome with dignity, knowing that your character remains intact, and that the true measure of your success was never the wealth you accumulated, but the virtue you practiced while pursuing it. To achieve this state of mind, we must learn to master our own imagination, which is often the primary engine of our suffering. We do not experience reality directly, we experience our interpretation of reality. An event occurs, a financial loss, a medical diagnosis, a sudden change in plans, and before our conscious mind can process it, our imagination leaps forward, painting a catastrophic picture of the future. We see ourselves ruined, humiliated, alone, and helpless. We experience the pain of a tragedy that hasn't happened yet and which may never happen at all. We torture ourselves with our own assumptions, drowning in anxieties that are entirely self-generated. Marcus Aurelius identified this internal mechanism with surgical precision, writing that your life is what your thoughts make it. He recognized that the mind can color every experience with its own judgment. A setback is only a disaster if you label it as a disaster. An insult is only a wound if you choose to feel wounded. He practiced a technique of radical objective description, stripping away the emotional labels we apply to things and looking at them exactly as they are. When he looked at his royal purple robes dyed with the blood of shellfish, he reminded himself that it was just wool soaked in the juice of a snail. When he looked at a luxurious feast, he reminded himself that the meat was just the corpse of a pig or bird, and the fine wine was just fermented grape juice. He did not do this to ruin his enjoyment of life, but to prevent things from overwhelming his reason. We can apply this exact technique to our modern anxieties. When you feel a wave of panic because an email arrived or a market shifted, pause and strip away the narrative of doom. The email is just words on a screen. The market shift is just numbers changing on a database. The event itself possesses no inherent power to harm your character or destroy your capacity for kindness, courage, and reason. The harm only begins when you allow your mind to weave a story of catastrophe around it. By intercepting your thoughts at the boundary of your consciousness, you can say to every impression, you are just an impression, not the reality itself.
You can examine it under the cool light of reason, separating what is actual from what your imagination has added. In doing so, you regain control over your internal climate. The storm may rage outside, but inside your mental citadel, the air remains perfectly clear, still, and calm. This mastery over our thoughts is particularly essential when confronting the ancient and destructive emotion of anger. Anger is perhaps the most obvious symptom of a desire to control others. We become angry when someone blocks our path, violates our expectations, or refuses to act according to our wishes. It is a sudden, violent protest against reality, an emotional temper tantrum that demands the universe conform to our desires. We convince ourselves that our anger is justified, that it is a righteous response to an injustice, and that it gives us the energy to correct the wrong. But the Stoics viewed anger as a temporary form of insanity, a highly destructive fire that always burns the vessel that holds it far more deeply than the object at which it is thrown. Marcus Aurelius spent a great deal of time reflecting on anger as he was surrounded by people who tested his patience on a daily basis. He noted that the consequences of our anger are always far more severe than the causes that provoked it. A careless word from a colleague might sting for a moment, but a reaction of fury can destroy a relationship, ruin a career, and leave a permanent stain on your reputation. He observed that anger is not a sign of manhood or strength, but of profound weakness. It is an admission that you have been defeated by the circumstance. It is a sign that your internal boundary has been breached and that you have allowed the external world to dictate your behavior. True strength is found in gentleness, in a calm mind that can look at injury without being shaken, and in a heart that can meet hostility with absolute composure. To combat anger, Marcus developed a profound psychological insight into the nature of human error. He realized that when people act with cruelty, selfishness, or dishonesty, they do so out of a form of moral blindness. They do not see that they are harming their own souls. Just as you would not become angry at a blind man for bumping into you in the street, you should not become angry at a morally blind person for acting blindly. They are victims of their own ignorance, believing that their vice will bring them some form of happiness. When someone treats you unfairly, instead of reacting with fury, ask yourself, what mistaken belief led them to act this way? What pain or fear are they trying to alleviate through this behavior? When you look at your enemies with this level of psychological empathy, your anger dissolves into compassion. You realize that their bad behavior is their own punishment, and that your duty is simply to ensure that their darkness does not find a home inside your own heart. This leads us to a deeper, more challenging dimension of self-mastery, the confrontation with our own mortality. The ultimate source of our desire for external control is our fear of death, our desperate subconscious attempt to build monuments of wealth, status, and power that will somehow protect us from our own inevitable end. We accumulate possessions, we pursue fame, and we try to dominate our environments because we want to feel permanent. We hide from the reality of our expiration, treating death as a distant, abstract event that only happens to others. We live our lives as if we have thousands of years to waste, postponing our personal growth, our acts of kindness, and our philosophical awakening to some vague, comfortable future. But Marcus Aurelius lived with the constant presence of death. He saw his friends, his generals, his mentors, and his children carried away by the plague. He knew that every time he went to sleep, he might not wake up to see the sunrise, and every time he stepped onto a battlefield, it could be his final hour. Instead of running from this reality or falling into a state of morbid depression, he used the awareness of death as a powerful tool for clarity, focus, and liberation. He practiced what the Stoics called memento mori, the conscious daily remembrance of our mortality. He wrote down a line that should be carved into the heart of every modern professional, student, and creator. You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. When you live with this realization, the entire perspective of your life changes in an instant. The petty conflicts that consumed your energy suddenly appear absurdly insignificant. The criticism that wounded your pride loses its sting entirely. The anxiety you felt about your future security dissolves, replaced by a profound gratitude for the single breath you are taking right now. You stop playing games of social comparison, you stop trying to manipulate the opinions of people you don't even respect, and you stop hoarding material goods you can never carry with you. Death ceases to be an enemy that robs you of life. Instead, it becomes a wise counselor that reminds you to live beautifully, to act with absolute justice, to love deeply, and to waste not a single moment on trivialities. You realize that the length of your life is completely outside your control, but the depth, the beauty, and the integrity of your life are entirely up to you. Let us bring this lofty ancient wisdom down into the concrete reality of a modern life, examining how self-mastery can be cultivated through a daily practice. It does not require you to abandon your modern responsibilities, to move to a monastery, or to live like an ancient hermit. It requires you to create a quiet space within your own routine, a daily ritual of mental preparation and reflection. Marcus Aurelius began his day with his personal journal, framing his mind for the struggles ahead, and he ended his day with a review of his actions, holding himself accountable to the high standards of his own philosophy. You can initiate this exact practice within your own life.
Imagine waking up tomorrow morning, and before you engage with the digital world, spending 10 quiet minutes with your own mind. You sit with your coffee or in a quiet room, and you look ahead at the day that awaits you. You identify the meetings that will be stressful, the individuals who will test your patience, and the uncertainties that could trigger your anxiety. You do not wish these challenges away. Instead, you rehearse them in your mind. You see yourself entering the stressful meeting and remaining perfectly calm. You see yourself encountering the difficult colleague and responding with quiet, dignified patience. You see yourself facing a sudden setback and instantly focusing on the solution rather than the problem. You anchor your mind in your core principles: courage, justice, temperance, and wisdom, deciding beforehand that no external event will be allowed to move you from these foundations. Then, as you step out into the world, you carry this awareness with you like an invisible shield. When the chaos of the day begins, when the traffic gridlocks, when the client cancels, when the online criticism arrives, you do not react with your old conditioned habits of panic and irritation. You catch yourself in the gap between the stimulus and the response. You take a slow, deep breath, and you whisper to yourself the words of Marcus: "This is not a misfortune. To bear it worthily is good fortune." You recognize that every obstacle is an opportunity to practice a virtue. The difficult client is an exercise in patience. The market crash is a test of resilience. The sudden criticism is a chance to cultivate humility. The world ceases to be an adversarial space trying to break your spirit. Instead, it becomes a magnificent training ground designed to forge your character. At the end of the day, before you sleep, you close the circle of your practice with an honest, compassionate review. You sit down with a notebook or simply in the quiet of your thoughts, and you look back over the events of the past 16 hours. You ask yourself the fundamental questions: where did I lose my composure today? Where did I allow my ego to dictate my actions? Where did I try to control something that was not up to me? And conversely, where did I show discipline? Where did I act with kindness and justice? You do not judge yourself harshly, and you do not slip into self-condemnation. You review your day with the objective, loving eye of a wise mentor. You acknowledge your missteps, understand the root causes of your reactions, and resolve to meet the next day with greater awareness. Through this practice of daily accountability, you gradually close the gap between the person you currently are and the person you are capable of becoming.
As we move toward the conclusion of this philosophical journey, let us understand that the path of self-mastery is not a destination you reach and then abandon. It is a lifelong practice, a continuous, daily commitment to the evolution of your own spirit. There will be days when you fail. There will be moments when your anger escapes your control, when your anxieties overwhelm your reason, and when you fall back into the old, exhausting habits of trying to manipulate the world around you. When these failures occur, do not lose heart and do not abandon the path. Even Marcus Aurelius, after decades of practice, would occasionally experience moments of profound weariness and frustration with his own progress. He would write to himself to return to the philosophy, to treat himself with grace, and to start again without delay. The victory of the Stoic path does not lie in attaining a state of flawless robotic perfection. It lies in the unyielding determination to dust yourself off after every fall, to look within with absolute honesty, and to step back into the arena of self-conquest with a clean heart. For the greatest victory a human being can ever achieve is not the subjugation of kingdoms, the acquisition of immense wealth, or the manipulation of the masses. The greatest victory is the quiet, magnificent conquest of one's self. When you finally stop trying to govern the behavior of others, when you release your desperate hold on outcomes you cannot predict, and when you focus the entirety of your soul on mastering your own mind, you walk out of the prison of vulnerability and step into the sunlight of lasting freedom. You become a source of immense stability and light in a chaotic world, a rock against which the waves of circumstance beat in vain. You realize that whatever happens outside you cannot touch the sanctuary of your character unless you permit it. You are the master of your own thoughts, the captain of your own soul, and the absolute ruler of your own internal empire. If this message has struck a chord within your spirit, if it has provided you with a sense of clarity, comfort, or a renewed determination to master your own mind in the midst of life's storms, we invite you to take a moment to join our community. Please hit the like button on this video, as it helps this ancient wisdom reach others who may be struggling in the darkness of anxiety and frustration. Subscribe to Wisdom of Stoic and turn on the notification bell so you can walk alongside us as we continue to unpack the timeless, life-changing philosophy of the great masters. Share this narrative with a friend, a colleague, or a loved one who might be fighting an internal battle right now and needs to be reminded of their own inner strength. And finally, leave a comment below sharing the specific insight, historical lesson, or philosophical principle from this story that resonated most deeply with your life today. Let us support one another in this grand, noble pursuit of self-mastery, remembering always that true power does not lie in ruling the world, but in gently, firmly ruling ourselves.